We're back. Welcome back to words are dumb. Yeah, so let's try that again. Hi, welcome to Easy Education. I'm Easy to Chris, and I am going to try and make education easy for you. So we're back for week 5, and week 5 is relatively straightforward. It is called The Role of Suffering in Growth. Straightforward, right? So there's always some kind of struggle and suffering whenever you're growing, and I am trying this whole system out as a new thing. And I realized this last week that the wireless mic system that I was using had this horrible buzz. So, okay, learned something, gotta try something else. So now I'm using my traditional shotgun mic setup. So hopefully this will sound a whole lot better. This will look a whole lot better. This will be a much better production, because that's kind of what the whole goal of this is to be, is I really do want this to be as much of a good production for you, so that way if you are encouraged to educate yourself or maybe educate somebody else, this is a worthwhile venture for you. But this week was really different because last week I was realizing, okay, I actually want to take this seriously. And I want to step up the production level of it a little bit. I want this to be what I envision it to be in my mind. I started thinking about the podcast that I was doing with my dad last year and some of the things that made it very successful. And, the opening was one of the things that helped me get into the mindset, and getting into that mindset is what we talked about last week. But I realized that there's a really good structure to the show that I had with my dad. And we had this whole thing called, so it was supper talk, but we had 3 segments that were all dinner related. So, what's on your plate was us just being able to talk back and forth about what was going on during the week. And then what are you bringing to the table was our prepared concepts and ideas that we were sharing with the other person. And because we were talking so much about politics and things that were going on in the world real time, we didn't really want to end the show on a heavy note. So we just called the last little bit desserts. We're just going to end with something sweet. So there was this whole theme to the show, and I think that's what made it work so well, is we had the flow going on. We had consistent content that we were being able to provide on a regular basis, and we knew how we wanted to format the show. And that's a lot harder when you're just yourself. Like, it's me and my camera and my computer. I don't have a team doing this. And I, even my grades are being performed by a robot. So at the end of the day, I'm the creative director, and I got to figure out what the right thing is. So obviously, I'm going to be talking to you guys about the things that I'm learning on a weekly basis. But the whole point of this project for me was being able to have some kind of practical application. So I'm reading, I'm writing, I'm editing, I'm getting feedback, I'm making video content. There's all these things that if you want to be a better storyteller, you need to tell stories. So I've been trying to figure out what homework for you guys is going to look like. I haven't figured that out yet. So there's no homework yet. I'm not too much of a jerk yet. But I have been trying to figure out how do I present myself? Because that's kind of hard for me. In the real world, I own a barber shop, and I may have a rule for me personally that I don't cut children, because realistically, I don't have a lot of patience in the real world. I understand where my limitations are. But this week I was really trying to understand who would my potential audience be, what is my demographics, as they were. And I've looked at all the social media things that I've done in the past, and I've realized that I've always had the opportunity to be myself, and I've always had the ability to speak my mind and really kind of talk however I want to talk. And growing up in the punk rock community, maybe there's some colorful language. Maybe there's some political leanings. Maybe there's a lot of things that, I identify with and around with my circle of friends. But you guys might not want that. And I realize that if you're here for education, you're here for education. And given the fact that I have a little bit of expertise in homeschooling because I was homeschooled my entire junior and high school education, and I'm continuing to homeschool myself as an adult, I've really been looking at some of the communities in America since COVID. And there are a lot of, real traditional families that have taken their kids out of the public schooling system and they want to homeschool their kids. And I can relate with that. And I don't want to offend anybody who is potentially coming here to be able to get some ideas on how it is that they can better raise their kids in their views and their values. And maybe you're just some guy or some gal who is, somewhere around middle age and you don't find my jokes funny. That's fine. I find my jokes funny. But my sense of sarcasm is definitely an acquired taste. So it's really forced me to kind of think about, who do I need to be for this? I want to be my authentic self, but I also want to be the best version of myself for you. And how do I get to that person when I'm in this space? And growing up, I've always kind of realized I can kind of mask who it is that I need to be based on the person across the room from me. But I'm alone in my office. I'm talking to a camera, and that's a little bit harder to mirror. So I just realized I just got to be me. And I am going to do my absolute best to try and make this content as family friendly as I possibly can moving forward, because I do have you guys in mind. But I'm also going to be thinking about how is it that I want to structure the show on a regular basis so that way you can have some consistency with the lessons. So obviously we're going to cover the book and the content of what the week is. But then I think what I'm also going to be doing is kind of looking at how I intend on applying these lessons practically in my life and give some examples of how these lessons have shown up in my life previously. After that, I want to give you guys some opportunity to be able to have the same thing that I have, which is practical application of the lessons that I'm learning. Because I think that, the best way of learning is either teaching or doing. And since it seems like I might be the one who's both teaching and doing, I want you guys to be able to do some of the doing. With that said, welcome to week 5. We are covering Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus. Now, last week, I was a big dum-dum and said his name was Albert Camus. I listened to a summary of the entire book and realized oh, I'm a big dum-dum and I had been mispronouncing his name. So Albert Camus, the week's theme is the role of suffering and growth. Now, what I'm going to start going through is what AI had actually dictated for me on a weekly basis to be focusing on. So what I was reading this week was honestly just the first 30 pages. Not a whole lot to cover, but this is actually really, really good content. The lens in which we need to read is confrontation with discomfort rather than escape. And the focus of the essay that I wrote, as well as what we're going to be talking about today, is why difficulty is not a design flaw. Now, the interesting thing about this book is the few things that we've been reading, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, as well as James Clear's Atomic Habits, this is piggybacking off of some of that. So Viktor Frankl was obviously a psychologist who was in Auschwitz for 3 years. Albert Camus was a European who wrote this during World War II. And when I initially went into this, I'm thinking, yeah, it's Sisyphus. It's about a guy who's just going out and doing it. It's going to be about stoicism. That is not what this is about at all. So this is an essay, and before we continue, if you are sensitive to any kind of topics of self-harm, that's what this book is about. So I'm gonna give you guys the opportunity. If you're not cool with that, you should boogie on through to your next video. If not, welcome for staying. So the whole book is about suicide and the suicides that were seen in World War II. And there is this interesting conundrum of, in making a decision to end one's life, the author finds that you find the meaning of life. And it's such a weird concept at first, but in reality, it makes the most sense. Because whenever you are struggling the most, that's when you really have to evaluate. So when you get to a point where you actually can say, life is not worth living, you have been able to look at life through a lens that allows you to make that decision of your own accord. So if you are someone who is looking at life and all you see around you is the chaos of World War II and the death and the absolute depravity and despair that so many are going through, and you just see life as absurd and life is not worth living, then the meaning of life is that life is absurd. And there is a bit of poetry in recognizing that there's an absurdity of life, like this is meaningless. So you can make a decision to spite the gods, or you can live in spite of the gods. And that's the idea of Sisyphus. There's a phrase that many people know, like, one must imagine Sisyphus as happy. This is the book that it comes from. And the idea is that in Sisyphus's eternal doom of pushing a boulder uphill, he has to believe that this is his purpose in life because he continues doing it. And if he continues doing it, he has found joy in his process and he is able to continue forward with knowledge that this is the meaning of life for me personally. Now, I want to kind of make this a little bit less abstract and a little bit more personal. I had gotten to a point in a prior life of mine that I had made the decision to opt out. I was really, really depressed. I had gone through divorce. I had gone through bankruptcy. And when I was 18, I got a job because it paid well. And then I just got a promotion. And then I got another promotion. And then I learned a new skill, and I learned another skill and got another promotion. And I climbed all the way up the corporate ladder, and all I could find was some rope. And I got to this point where I was making money, but I was not happy. And every single day I had a 20-minute commute going to work, and it just became this conversation that I would have with myself where I hate doing this. This isn't worthwhile for me. This is not something that I can see myself doing anymore. And I started fantasizing about death and having a real conversation with myself every day for 20 minutes on my way to the thing that I hated the most. And that fantasy became a little bit more tangible every single day. It stopped being this abstract idea of, I just want to die. And it became a little bit more tangible as soon as I said, I kind of just want to park my car in my garage and just leave it running. Yeah, that's I think that's what I want to do. And then another few weeks passed, and it became, I think I want to do that soon. And eventually got to a point where I was planning out the day. I had the idea, I had the plan, and I had the time. And then I was on the phone with my mom, and she asked me if I had heard the news about Robin Williams. And I think that was a really, really interesting day for me, because there's not a lot of people that have impacted me in their death. But Robin Williams was somebody who brought so many people joy. And we didn't know at the time what he was suffering with. We just heard the news that he had passed away from committing suicide. And that was the moment that I realized how close to that decision that I was. And I realized that I needed to talk to somebody. The next day I went to work, but I talked to my boss and I said, this is what I've been planning and I have no idea what to do. We realized that I was on a path that was not making me happy whatsoever. And I needed to quit my job. Like, I needed to do something, anything else. So I do what I typically do when I'm trying to find something new to do, and I reverse engineered a career. And I started really asking myself questions that were terribly challenging questions. How do I view success? What brings me joy? What could potentially be worth living for when I don't know what is worth living for? These are really hard questions for me. But ultimately, the thing that I realized that brought me joy was relationships. And I was in a career that didn't value relationships. And I was in a career that only provided me single serving opportunities to have interactions with people, and then I never see them again. So I needed to find something that would allow me to create success in the way that I defined success. And, I still don't understand how I came across with cutting hair, but that was the option that I chose because I knew I'd be on my feet all day. I would be able to build relationships with people that would be long-lasting relationships because they would be coming back and I would continue to know people and I'd get to see what's going on in their lives. I'd be able to do something creative with my hands and be able to take pride in the work that I had. And I'd never considered cutting hair, but a decade later, I now realize that cutting hair saved my life. And is cutting hair the meaning of life? No, not at all, not even a little bit. But for me, building relationships is the purpose of my life. And it's one of the things that brings me so much joy. And it's why I continue going to work on a daily basis and why I no longer dread the commute that I have to work. And that's the whole point, is it takes a lot of adversity and it takes a lot of challenging times for you to be able to sit down and be introspective with yourself and really ask yourself, what am I living for? What are the things that are the most important to me? Now, when we tie the myth of Sisyphus into the rest of the reading material that we have, you have Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. What is the purpose in life that gives you enough drive to endure the things that you're moving forward? James Clear's Atomic Habits. How can you identify yourself as someone who has enough purpose in the reasoning behind what it is that they do, that your identity change will create better habits for yourself moving forward? So as I'm going into this whole curriculum that I didn't choose, like, let's be clear here, I did not choose these books. I kind of gave an idea to the AI prompt that I want you to help me based off of where I'm at right now. And the foundational lessons that this program is wanting me to learn is how to recognize what are the most important things in my life and how to effectively build structures in my life that are guiding me towards that direction. Oddly enough, it only took setting this camera up once for me to now respect this space a little bit differently. And I can get into this headspace a little bit different and be able to put on the best version of myself because I see that the program that I've built for myself is designed by what I want to become. And that's one of the things I've been talking with a handful of my clients in the barber shop about. The whole thing that I would love to be able to do with this experiment that I'm doing with putting this out as a weekly podcast and a weekly video series is I really worry about how people utilize AI. I really do worry that we have an older generation that are simply replacing their search engine with artificial intelligence. And instead of asking Google, what do I do for this? They're just asking ChatGPT for this. And we have a younger generation that is simply asking for the answers to the questions that are being asked of them. And critical thought requires introspection. Critical thought requires you to look at difficult situations from multiple angles and come to your own conclusion on what you feel about something. And if we begin to have generations that simply have an aggregate of an answer, we're going to lose our ability to have critical thought. And I think that that's one of the most valuable lessons that it's starting me out with. So that's kind of the lesson of the myth of Sisyphus, just in the first 30 pages that we're taking out of this week, is we're kind of tying it into every other bit of the reading material that we've had, and we're realizing why this is so important. And it was interesting when I had that aha moment earlier this week after I read the first little bit of the book, because I've really been struggling with this whole project. You know, why am I doing this? Why am I putting stuff out there? Why am I making myself vulnerable? Why am I giving up time when my wife is watching Bridgerton and I could be hanging out with her? It's because I don't want to watch Bridgerton. Like that, let's be honest, I don't want to watch Bridgerton. I would much rather be here talking to a camera than watching Bridgerton. But you get what I'm saying, right? Like there's this whole reason of going into the second month of something that people fail. That nuance and that fun novelty, it kind of wears off and now it becomes work. So why would I keep doing this? And ultimately, I realized because this is what I want to do. I think that life is supposed to have some struggle in it. I think that that's the purpose of existing, is growth. And if you just stagnate on a regular basis, where's the fun in that? You know, I love the fact that I have had this aha moment where I realized that this whole year-long process is going to transform me into the person that I want to become. And I can share that with you. And I can hopefully share the enthusiasm that being able to think critically can provide to people when they realize that they can have really interesting conversations with people and not be afraid of how a conversation navigates itself, because they're comfortable navigating through wherever that conversation takes them. I wind up having a lot of very vulnerable and polite conversations in the barbershop that are just about the things that are going on in the world today. And when you have a mixed space, they always say that, you know, politics and religion are the two things that you shouldn't talk about. But I believe that if you can have polite conversation in polite society, you know, the more that you know about another person, the deeper your relationships can be with that person. I'll give you one more example from this week on that specifically. I do my live streams on Wednesdays and Saturdays on my TikTok. And there was a couple people that had jumped in that I'd never met before. I said, we're going to play a game. You guys can ask a stranger any question. And I'm like, 99% chance I'm an open book. I'll let you know if you hit that 1%. But more than likely, I will tell you whatever you want to know. And a person I have never met before asked me, what is something that I have changed my opinion on that has been impactful to me over the last year? And I was kind of dumbfounded. That was a really deep question to ask a stranger. And I sat there and said, you know, the time that I put into some relationships, I've thought all the time that I put into relationships is valuable, but there's some relationships that I'm putting too much effort into, And a lot of the effort that I am putting in is not reciprocated. And sometimes you don't know until it's gone. Sometimes you just don't want it to go. And there were two situations in my life that I became comfortable with a relationship that I shouldn't have been comfortable with. And when it left, I was pretty devastated. It was pretty hurtful the way that the relationship ended. But 6 months later, I realized, man, that was a very unhealthy relationship. It was something that it was bringing out the worst of me. And in it no longer having the proximity to me, I'm able to have the capacity to be the person that I want to be. And then separate from that, there's another relationship that I knew I was putting a lot of effort into, and I wasn't seeing any of that effort come back. And it hurt to walk away from that relationship. But this space that I've provided myself is energy that I was spending on something that was just fruitless. And now I'm able to find the energy in investing it back into myself. And this is something that I told a stranger, and it was just a vulnerability that I think more of us need to be able to have, because if you can share more of yourself with other people, vulnerability can be a strength, and your ability to navigate challenging emotions and challenging conversations is strength demonstrated through that ability. So that's going to be my rant for week 5. Like I said, this was the topic of, I don't remember, the role of suffering and growth. So I guess that's kind of relevant. If you guys are enjoying this, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Put a comment down below. Let me know what you're thinking. If you have ideas on what it is that you'd like to see me give you guys for some kind of homework or takeaway project, so that way you can have some practical application in your life, leave those comments too. If you hate everything that I'm doing, please be kind. Maybe, but let me know. Like, feedback is a gift, however it comes through. And I want to make this something that's good for all of us. I want to be able to be concise, and I want to be useful for you guys. If you want to read the essays that I'm writing on what it is that I'm reading, my Substack is updated every week. It's Easy to Chris. You can also check out both the video of what we're doing right now as well as the essay on my website, easytochris.com. But if you want to subscribe, you can find me on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts. And until next week, take it easy, guys.